Mara had always enjoyed the idea of escape. The chaos of her city life, filled with crowded streets, endless meetings, and constant noise, had taken a toll on her. She longed for peace, quiet, and a chance to breathe. That's why on a sunny weekend morning, she found herself in the middle of nowhere, riding a horse on a ranch that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was fresh, the skies were clear, and everything felt far away from the chaos of her usual life. She had been told about the ranch by a friend who knew her need for space. "It's quiet, beautiful, and peaceful," the friend had said. Mara couldn't resist. It was the perfect place to escape her routine and clear her mind. She had rented a horse and decided to go on a solo ride across the sprawling land. Mara wasn't an experienced rider, but she had taken lessons in the past and figured it wouldn't be hard. After all, how difficult could it be to ride a horse through an open field, she thought. She was more accustomed to the busy, fast-paced city streets, but the ranch offered a different kind of beauty. It was vast with miles of land that seemed to stretch into the horizon. The sight of the green grass, the scent of the wildflowers, and the sound of the hooves moving steadily on the earth were all new to her. As Mara galloped, she could feel the wind in her hair, the horse's powerful legs beneath her. She smiled, thinking this was the best decision she had made in weeks. For a brief moment, she forgot about everything, the emails, the deadlines, and the constant pressure of her life in the city. Here she felt free, but her moment of serenity didn't last long. Without warning, the horse beneath her reared up, snorting in panic. Startled, Mara pulled the reins back, trying to regain control. She had no idea what had frightened the horse. It could have been a sudden noise, a wild animal, or even a change in the wind. Whatever it was, the horse bolted. Mara tried to calm the horse, pulling on the reins with all her might, but it was no use. The horse's speed was too much, and soon Mara was holding on for dear life. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the horse stumbled. Mara was thrown off and landed hard on the ground with a sharp thud. Her vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness swept over her. She groaned, her body aching from the sudden fall. The horse, now spooked and unsettled, galloped away into the distance, leaving her lying on the ground alone and vulnerable. Mara tried to sit up, but the world spun around her. The pain in her back and head made it difficult to focus. She could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance, but it didn't seem like anyone was around. She was on her own, with no idea where she was or how far she had fallen from the ranch. As she lay there, struggling to gather her thoughts, a shadow appeared over her. She tried to focus, but her head was still spinning. The figure above her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt. His face was rugged, weathered by time and the harsh sun. His boots were covered in dirt, and he carried a kind of quiet strength in his presence. He was looking down at her, his expression unreadable. Mara's heart raced, her mind in a state of panic. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted. Her body still felt like it was made of lead, and her hands trembled as she tried to push herself up from the ground. "Stay still," the man said, his voice low but calm. "You've taken quite a fall. Don't move." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to stand up and get away from him, but the pain in her body made it clear that moving was out of the question. She felt helpless. Her heart pounded faster, fear creeping in as the man knelt down beside her. "Who are you?" Mara managed to ask, her voice shaky. "I'm Tom," the man replied. "I live on this ranch. You're lucky I was out here. You could have hurt yourself worse." Mara didn't know what to say. All she could do was nod, still trying to process what was happening. She had no idea how long she had been lying on the ground or if anyone else would come looking for her. Tom didn't say much as he carefully inspected her injuries, checking her for anything more serious than the scrapes and bruises on her arms and legs. His touch was gentle but firm, his hands surprisingly tender despite the ruggedness of his appearance. He worked quickly, wrapping a cloth around her arm to stop the bleeding from a cut she hadn't noticed before. Mara felt a mix of confusion and frustration. She had been out here trying to enjoy the peacefulness of nature, and now she found herself in the hands of a stranger in the middle of nowhere. She didn't know who he was or what his intentions were, but her instincts told her she couldn't trust him completely. "Please, untie me, I beg you," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. The dizziness was beginning to fade, but she could still feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. Tom paused, looking at her with a mix of concern and caution. She didn't know why he was hesitant, but the tension in his body told her that he was thinking hard about something. His hands remained still for a moment and Mara's heart raced. Was he going to leave her there alone? Was he going to do something that would make everything worse? But then with a sigh, Tom moved. He untied the rough knot that bound her hands together. As soon as her hands were free, Mara rubbed her wrists, relieved to feel the circulation returning. Still, there was no denying that she was stuck in a strange, unfamiliar place with someone she didn't know. Tom offered a hand, helping her to her feet. Mara hesitated for a moment, but took it. She was in no condition to walk alone, and she wasn't sure she could trust her legs to hold her up, let alone escape if she needed to. "Are you okay to walk?" Tom asked, his voice more concerned than before. Mara nodded, but her legs wobbled beneath her. She didn't know if it was from the fall, the fear, or the overwhelming sense of helplessness that filled her, but somehow she managed to stay on her feet, though every step felt like a struggle. Tom stayed by her side, his strong presence offering some comfort, though she still couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled into a situation that might be more dangerous than she realized. Mara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as she struggled to keep her balance. Tom's hand was steady at her elbow, guiding her as she slowly took each step. The pain in her legs and arms was constant, but it was the shock of the fall that made everything feel hazy. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, louder than the wind rustling through the tall grass surrounding them. The ranch stretched out before her, endless fields of green, but in her current state, all she could focus on was staying upright. Tom was beside her, his pace slow and steady, making sure she didn't fall again. He didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was like an unspoken understanding that he would help her without needing to explain anything. Yet Mara couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to her. She had no idea who Tom was or why he had appeared just when she had needed help the most. Her mind raced with questions, each more urgent than the last. Was he the ranch owner? Or just someone passing through? Did he live out here alone, or were there others? As they walked, the sky began to change, the clouds overhead turning a soft gray. The wind picked up and Mara felt a chill, despite the warmth of the day. She shivered, not just from the temperature, but from the vulnerability she was feeling. She couldn't help but glance at Tom as they moved through the field. He walked with a calm confidence, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth with every step. There was something about the way he moved, like he knew this land like the back of his hand, and that made Mara feel both a little better and a little more nervous. He seemed so comfortable, so at home out here, while she was a stranger lost in both the landscape and the situation. Her thoughts were interrupted when they reached the edge of the ranch. A small weathered house sat in the distance, surrounded by a few outbuildings and fences that seemed to stretch out for miles. Mara's first instinct was to want to get away, to find someone else, someone familiar, someone who could explain what was going on. But her body wasn't cooperating. She was still too dizzy, too tired from the fall to think clearly. So instead of running, she let Tom guide her toward the house. "I'll take care of you," Tom said quietly, his voice low and reassuring. "You're safe here." Safe. The word didn't settle easily in her mind. How could she be safe? She didn't know this man, this place. The ranch was remote, isolated, and Tom was someone she hadn't expected to meet on this trip. 1,000 thoughts filled her head, but none of them seemed to answer the questions that she needed to be answered. When they reached the front porch of the small house, Tom helped her up the steps, his hand gentle on her back. He opened the door and Mara stepped inside. The smell of wood, dust, and the faint scent of leather greeted her. The interior was simple but warm, with a large stone fireplace on one wall, a few mismatched chairs, and shelves full of books and tools. It looked like a place where someone spent a lot of time alone, but not in a way that felt cold. There was life in the place, just not much of it. Tom helped her sit down in a chair by the fire. She winced slightly as she lowered herself, the soreness from the fall starting to settle into her muscles. Her clothes were dusty, her hair a mess, but none of it seemed to matter as much as the questions swirling in her head. She needed answers, but part of her was too afraid to ask. "Do you need some water?" Tom asked, breaking the silence as he moved toward a nearby cupboard. Mara nodded, her throat dry from the dust. Tom handed her a glass of water and she took a long sip, the coolness helping to ease her discomfort. As she drank, her mind struggled to catch up. She needed to know who this man was and what he wanted. She had no idea how far from civilization she was or if she could even get help if she needed it. "Why did you tie me up?" she finally asked, her voice softer than she intended. Tom looked up at her, his face hardening for a moment, but then he sighed and lowered his gaze. "I wasn't sure if you were okay," he said simply. "You fell pretty hard, and I didn't know if you were dangerous or just lost. When you woke up, I didn't want you to hurt yourself more. It's not safe out here alone." Mara nodded slowly, understanding his reasoning, even if it didn't make her feel any less uneasy. The trust between them wasn't instant. She still felt like an outsider here, a stranger in a place that wasn't hers. She wanted to believe Tom, but she was still wrestling with the fear of being in a situation where she didn't have control. Tom took a seat across from her, leaning back in his chair, his eyes not meeting hers for a long time. "I don't get many visitors out here," he said quietly. "Been living alone for a while." Mara studied him, trying to read his face. There was something in his tone, something guarded. She could tell he wasn't used to opening up to anyone, and she could understand why. After all, who would want to invite strangers into their lives when they had been hurt before? "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice softening a little. I live in the city," Mara replied, unsure of how much to share. "I just needed to get away for a while." "The city," Tom repeated as though he was testing the word. "I can't say I understand much of it. Never liked the noise. The crowds." Mara looked out the window, the field stretching before her, feeling the weight of her situation. "It's different out here, quieter. I guess that's why I came. But I didn't expect to end up like this." Tom nodded slowly, his eyes scanning her face as though looking for something more. "Sometimes people just need to get away from everything. The quiet helps, but it doesn't fix everything." Mara felt his words more than she wanted to. There was truth in them, truth she had been running from. She had come here to find peace, but now she was tangled in something she didn't fully understand. And yet, in this strange house with this strange man, she felt a small flicker of safety. Not much, but it was something. "I'm not dangerous," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "I promise, I wasn't expecting to get hurt." Tom didn't say anything at first, but his expression softened. He was still cautious, but the tension in the room eased slightly. Mara knew she wasn't fully out of danger yet. But there was something about Tom, something that made her believe he wasn't going to hurt her. For a moment, the two of them just sat in the quiet of the room, the fire crackling softly in the background. Neither of them said anything more, but there was a sense that things were changing. Slowly, Mara was starting to realize that she didn't have to face this alone. Maybe Tom wasn't the answer to all of her problems, but for now, he was here. And that for the moment was enough. As the hours passed, Mara began to feel a strange sense of calm settle over her. Tom had taken care of her, offering food, water, and a place to rest. His actions were quiet, but there was something about the way he moved that made her feel as though he understood the weight of silence. Still, Mara couldn't shake the questions that had been swirling in her mind since the moment she had fallen. Who was this man, really? Why was he so distant? And why had he chosen to help her when he could have easily turned away? The evening sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Tom had made a small fire outside, the orange glow flickering against the darkening sky. Mara sat beside it, wrapped in a blanket Tom had given her earlier. It wasn't cold yet, but the fire provided a sense of comfort. She could see the stars slowly beginning to appear in the sky, one by one like a blanket of tiny lights stretching across the heavens. The beauty of the moment made her forget, even if just for a second, how out of place she felt here. Tom was sitting on a log across from her, his face illuminated by the firelight. He was quieter than usual, lost in thought. Mara hesitated, but finally decided to break the silence. "Tom," she began softly, her voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" Tom looked up at her, his gaze steady but unreadable. He nodded slightly, a silent invitation to continue. "I don't understand. You didn't have to help me," Mara said. Her eyes fell to the fire as she spoke. "Why did you?" "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Tom was silent for a moment. Mara could tell he was choosing his words carefully, weighing something in his mind. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost as if he was talking more to himself than to her. "Most people don't stay long out here," he began. "It's a lonely place. People come through, pass by, and then they're gone. I'm used to being alone. I don't expect much from anyone. But when I saw you fall, something about it made me think you weren't like the others." Mara raised an eyebrow, confused. "Like the others?" What do you mean? Tom shifted his position, his eyes darkening slightly. People come to the ranch for different reasons. Some are looking for peace, like you. Others, they come for something else. Something darker. Mara frowned. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but her curiosity pushed her to ask more. Darker? What do you mean? Tom took a deep breath and looked at the flames, his face distant. I wasn't always alone out here. A long time ago, I had a family. A wife, children. Life was different then. But things changed, and after everything happened, I chose to live this way. On my own. The ranch is quiet, safe. Mara felt a lump form in her throat. There was a deep sadness in Tom's words, something raw that she hadn't expected to hear. She could see now that there was much more to this man than the rough exterior he showed the world. He wasn't just a reclusive rancher. He was someone who had experienced loss, who had seen his world change in ways he hadn't planned for. I'm sorry, Mara said, her voice soft with sympathy. I didn't know. Tom shook his head as if to dismiss her words. You don't have to apologize. It's just life. It's what happens. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the air. Mara stared into the flames, her mind swirling with new information. She hadn't expected Tom to open up like this, especially not so soon. But his words had a weight to them, and somehow Mara understood that this was a man who had built walls around himself. He had experienced pain and grief, and perhaps that was why he kept to himself. Was it your choice to leave? Mara asked cautiously, sensing there was more to the story. Tom didn't answer immediately. He looked at the fire for a long while, his eyes distant and unreadable. When he finally spoke again, his voice was rough, as if the words were difficult to say. Sometimes things happen that you can't control. People make choices, and sometimes those choices lead to pain. And other times you're left with nothing but the choice to walk away. He paused, then added, I wasn't the one who left, but in the end I had to. Mara didn't press him further, sensing that this was as much as he was willing to share for now. She didn't know what had happened to him or his family, but she could feel the weight of his loss like a shadow that followed him wherever he went. It was clear that Tom was not just a lonely rancher, but a man who had lost something, someone he loved. And that loss had shaped everything about who he was now. The silence between them stretched for a while as Mara processed what she had just learned. She had come here to escape her own problems, to find some quiet. But now she was beginning to realize that the ranch and Tom held their own stories, their own burdens. They were both carrying things that were not immediately visible, things that took time to understand. After a long pause, Mara finally spoke again, her voice softer than before. I came out here to get away from everything too, she admitted. The city, the noise, the constant rush of life. But I think I was running from something else too. Something I didn't want to face. Tom glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes seemed to soften just slightly. What's that? Mara hesitated. She hadn't really admitted this to anyone before, but something about the honesty in Tom's voice made her want to share. I think I was running from myself. From the choices I've made. From the things I thought I could escape, but I just can't. Tom nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she thought. Running doesn't always work. Eventually you have to face what you're running from. Mara let out a long breath, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. It was true. She'd been running for so long, thinking that distance could heal her wounds, but it didn't work that way. In the quiet of the ranch, away from everything she knew, the truth had started to catch up with her. She glanced at Tom, who was staring into the fire again, lost in his own thoughts. For a moment, Mara didn't know what to say. There were still so many questions, so many things she didn't understand about Tom, about herself, and about what the future held. But for the first time since her fall, she didn't feel completely lost. There was something in the way Tom had spoken, in the way he had shared just enough of his pain that made her feel like she wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, they both had a chance to heal, even if it was in small, quiet ways. The days that followed were quieter than Mara had expected. After their deep conversation by the fire, she felt something shift between her and Tom. It wasn't an immediate bond, but it was a change. They had shared pieces of themselves that neither of them had expected to open up about. Still, there was a long way to go before either of them would truly let go of their pasts. Each morning, Mara helped Tom with the small chores around the ranch. It wasn't much, feeding the animals, cleaning up after the horses, and sometimes walking around the property. But it kept her busy. She wasn't used to the physical labor, and at first she felt awkward and clumsy. But slowly she grew accustomed to the rhythm of the work, and it was strangely calming. There was something about the simple tasks that allowed her to clear her mind. The repetitive motions of sweeping, cleaning, or gathering the hay brought her into the present moment, where she could focus on something other than her worries. Tom didn't speak much as they worked together, but his presence was reassuring. His movements were efficient and purposeful, each task done with the skill of someone who had lived this life for a long time. Mara found herself watching him, noticing how easily he moved from one chore to the next, as though the ranch had become an extension of himself. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire again, not speaking much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if the unspoken understanding between them grew each day. They were both still dealing with their own battles, but for a moment it didn't matter. One evening, after a long day of work, Mara sat on the porch, staring out at the ranch. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the fields. The breeze was gentle, and the scent of the earth filled her senses. For the first time since she had arrived, Mara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't that her problems had disappeared, but for a few fleeting moments they felt distant. She felt the pull of something deeper, a quiet part of herself she had been ignoring. Tom came out to join her, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He handed one to her, and she took it gratefully, feeling the warmth of the cup seep into her hands. "Do you ever wonder what you're doing here?" Mara asked, looking at the horizon, the light fading into a soft twilight. She hadn't meant to speak the thought aloud, but it came out before she could stop it. Tom sat down beside her, sipping his tea without saying anything for a while. His gaze was distant, his eyes following the path of the setting sun. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a beautiful sight that only seemed to deepen the silence around them. "I think about it sometimes," Tom finally said, his voice quiet. "What life would be like if things had been different. If I hadn't made the choices I made." Mara looked at him, but he didn't meet her gaze. There was something in his voice, a hint of regret, but it was hard to know if he was talking about the past or something more recent. "I don't know if I ever figured out what I'm doing here," Mara admitted. She paused, unsure if she should continue. But Tom had been so open with her, so she decided to share her own feelings. "I came out here because I thought I needed to escape. I thought the quiet would fix everything. But the more I'm here, the more I realize that escaping doesn't work. You can't outrun yourself." Tom glanced at her then, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that evening. There was a brief flicker of understanding in his gaze, a recognition of the struggle she was describing. It was a struggle he had known too well. "It's not about escaping," he said, his tone more thoughtful now. "It's about learning how to live with what's happened, finding a way to move forward." Mara nodded slowly. His words were simple, but there was truth in them. She had spent so much time running, so much time trying to bury everything she didn't want to face. But the ranch, the quiet days, and even the hard work had shown her that facing what was inside of her wasn't as impossible as she had once thought. It wasn't easy, but it was something she could do if she was willing to try. The next morning, Mara woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, but the sky was already beginning to lighten, casting a soft pink glow across the fields. She felt a strange energy inside her, a new kind of resolve she hadn't expected. She knew she wasn't going to solve everything all at once, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to face the day, ready to face whatever came next. She got dressed and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, the scent of dew on the grass filling her lungs. She felt awake, aware of everything around her, the sound of the birds, the rustle of the leaves in the trees, the faint whisper of the wind. It was as if the world had come alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. Tom was already out by the barn, working as usual. She approached him slowly, but he didn't look up at her at first. Instead, he continued to tend to the horses, brushing down one of the mares. "I want to help today," Mara said, her voice firm, though she wasn't sure how he would respond. She didn't want to just be a guest anymore, someone who sat on the sidelines while Tom did all the work. She wanted to be part of something, to prove to herself that she wasn't just running anymore. Tom paused, his hand stilling on the horse's coat. He looked over at her, studying her face for a moment. There was something in his eyes, a small flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe approval. He didn't say anything right away, but he nodded, motioning toward the next stall. "All right," Let's get to work." Mara felt a sense of pride swell inside her as she followed his lead. The tasks were simple, but they required focus and care. She found herself completely immersed in the work, her hands moving with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just trying to keep herself busy anymore. She was learning, growing, and becoming a part of this place, this life that she had never imagined for herself. Throughout the morning, Tom didn't say much, but Mara could sense his approval in the way he moved around her, in the small gestures that showed he trusted her. She wasn't just some outsider anymore. She was someone he could rely on, even if it was in small ways. As they worked, Mara felt a shift inside her. The questions that had plagued her for so long about her life, her choices, her future, began to feel a little less heavy. She wasn't going to solve everything in one day, but she was starting to see a path forward. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be so lonely after all. By the time the sun reached its peak, Mara was exhausted but strangely content. She had worked hard, and for the first time in weeks she felt like she had earned the peace she had been searching for. As she and Tom stood side by side looking out at the land they had worked together, she realized that she had found something more than just an escape. She had found a place where she could finally start healing, where she could begin to rebuild the parts of herself that had been broken, and for the first time in a long time, Mara felt a glimmer of hope. The days seemed to blend together after that. Mara had stopped counting the hours and minutes. They had become irrelevant. What mattered now was the rhythm of her days, the work, the quiet, the slowly building connection between her and Tom. There was no hurry to anything, no deadline to meet. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt like she had time to breathe. She could wake up without feeling the pressure of the outside world weighing on her, without the constant reminder of everything she thought she had left behind. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever truly was. But it was enough. The ranch had become more than just a place of escape. It was slowly becoming a home. Every morning she helped Tom with the animals, fed the horses, and worked in the fields. Even though the tasks were simple, they were hers to do, and they gave her a sense of accomplishment. There was no rush, no urgency, only the satisfaction of completing each task and the quiet moments shared with Tom afterward. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was comfortable. It was as if the space they shared didn't need words to be understood. And over time, Mara realized that this silence, this peacefulness, was just as important as the words they did exchange. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and orange, Tom and Mara sat together on the porch again. The fire crackled softly beside them, its warmth cutting through the cool evening air. They had spent the day repairing some of the fences along the property, and Mara's muscles were sore from the hard work. But despite the fatigue, she felt a deep satisfaction, a sense of connection to the land and to Tom that she hadn't expected when she had first arrived. Tom looked over at her as they sat in the glow of the firelight. His face, usually so guarded, had softened over the weeks they had spent together. Mara had noticed it, a quiet kind of openness that had slowly crept into his expressions. It was as if, little by little, the walls he had built around himself had begun to crack, and while they hadn't completely disappeared, there was a sense of something lighter, more hopeful in the air. "You've been here for a while now," Tom said quietly, his gaze still fixed on the fire. "How do you feel about it?" Mara looked at him, surprised by the question. She hadn't really thought about it in those terms before. It was as if she had settled into this life without even noticing, as if the days had gone by without any great effort. But now, with Tom asking, she realized just how far she had come from the woman who had arrived here, frightened and uncertain. I think I'm starting to find what I was looking for," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "Not just peace, but something I didn't expect. I'm starting to feel like I belong here. Not just on the ranch, but in my own life. It's like I'm not running anymore. I don't need to keep escaping." Tom nodded, his eyes thoughtful as he glanced at her. He didn't say anything at first, but there was a softness to his gaze that spoke volumes. His words were always few, but when he spoke, they were never empty. "You've changed, you know," he said, his voice gentle. "You've come a long way since the first day I found you on the ground. You've found something here. I can see it." Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had worked hard to rebuild herself, to let go of the fears and regrets that had haunted her. But it wasn't until Tom had mentioned it that she realized just how much progress she had made. The feeling of belonging, the understanding that she was no longer defined by the mistakes of her past, was something she had fought for without even realizing it. It hasn't been easy, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. There were days when I felt like I was going to break, days when I wanted to run again. But I didn't, I stayed, and I'm glad I did. Tom's gaze softened further and he turned slightly toward her. There was something in his eyes that Mara couldn't quite place, something unspoken that felt both familiar and foreign. For a moment, the world around them seemed to still, as if time had momentarily stopped just for them. We all have our own battles, he said softly, but it's how we face them that counts. Mara looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. There was a calmness to Tom now, a peace that had been hard-earned over the years. He had faced his own demons, his own pain, and yet he had found a way to keep going. And in that moment, Mara realized that, like her, he wasn't defined by what had happened to him in the past. They were both moving forward, step by step, finding their own way back to themselves. For the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, Mara felt a deep sense of clarity. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the world or from herself. She had found a place, a home perhaps, not just in the ranch but within herself. She could stand on her own, facing whatever came next with a newfound strength she hadn't known was there. The evening grew quieter as the fire burned down to embers. The stars began to fill the sky, their bright pinpricks scattered across the dark canvas above. Mara felt a sense of peace settle over her. There were still many unanswered questions in her life, still things she needed to figure out. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. The journey ahead might not be easy, but it didn't have to be walked alone. Tom stood up after a while, stretching his tired limbs. He offered a small smile, a rare one that made Mara's heart flutter unexpectedly. It was simple but genuine. It was a smile that spoke of understanding, of shared experiences, of two people who had found something in each other without fully realizing it at first. "I'm heading inside," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of finality to the evening. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow there's more to do." Mara nodded, standing up as well. Her legs were sore from the day's work, but she felt lighter than she had in a long time. It was strange to think that just weeks ago she had been a completely different person, someone afraid of the quiet, afraid of facing the past. But now, as she stood beside Tom, watching him head inside, she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived here. And that change wasn't just about the ranch or the work. It was about who she was becoming. "Good night, Tom," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. "Good night, Mara," he replied, his tone gentle and sincere. As Mara made her way to the small cabin where she had been staying, she felt a deep sense of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had learned to face her fears, to accept herself, and to find peace in the most unexpected of places. And as the night settled around the ranch, Mara realized that this feeling of belonging, of acceptance, and of growth was exactly what she had been searching for all along. She was finally home. In this final part, the resolution comes through as Mara accepts the progress she has made in her life. The relationship with Tom has grown to a place of mutual respect, and Mara has found peace within herself. The writing keeps the focus on their emotional journeys and their gradual healing, while ensuring that the audience feels the closure and growth of the characters.